Wow. I love that intro. That was kind of cool. And sorry to cut you off because normally we'll have like a little backstage get together before we start this off. But everyone, welcome to today's Franchise Coffee Chat, July 31st with Mandar. And Mandar, can you share how you say your last name again?
Dange.
With everyone. Dange. Perfect. Mandar is originally from Bombay, and he's spent over the past 25 years in tech at various large corporate companies like HP and Sun Microsystems. July 31st with Mandar. And sorry, your last name again?
Dange.
I feel like we have a little background there. But he's a serial tech entrepreneur and transitioned into multi-unit franchising, and now back in tech. So for today, our conversation is kind of going to be revolving around why he got into franchising and how he left franchising to go back to tech because they found a void in compliance, right? And then we'll dive into a little bit of an Ask Me Anything session. But love to kind of go around. I know some of you are new to join us today, so I'd like to go around with like intros. So Lauren, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today. I really enjoy these talks, and I've known Mandar for quite some time, as well as Keith and William. So enjoying the conversation. I've been in the industry for, over 15 years, and I work specifically within the franchise community at TriNet to help deliver things like compliance, HR solutions, and all those things that franchisees and franchisors have to do when managing their businesses. So.
Perfect. And then Keith, can we kick it off with you next?
Yes, thank you, William and Lauren. Very excited to be here. So I'm more widely known for my radio show, my podcast, Silicon Valley Insider, which is a local radio show, but broadcast to 120 countries. But I'm also the managing partner of Guardian Insight Group. We help large companies and startups. The interest in franchising is that we're all about pivoting, and there are so many people now, we'll call it a side hustle, but there's so many people interested in how to actively manage their business, their career. So this is just a great platform for that. I really want to thank you and Lauren for putting this together.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, Keith. And if everyone doesn't know, we're so lucky to have Keith and Silicon Valley Insider present the Franchise Coffee Chat every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And it's sponsored by TriNet. Lauren and I spearheaded the franchise practice about over 18 months ago. I've been with TriNet for over 5 years, and our specialty really is helping out multi-unit owners, right? Being able to provide, a standardized and standardized infrastructure for these entities, right? But through that, we've met Mandar, and we are so excited to have him on today again. Mandar, can you give us kind of like a little quick, brief intro about yourself?
Sure. First of all, happy to be here. Glad to be here, and it's an honor to be here. I've been meeting Keith and you guys is awesome. You guys have met before as well. Particularly, I've been a techie. I'm a physicist actually, and that explains some of the pictures behind me here. And that was a question that has been asked to me all the time. But I'm like, I like to think like this guy. I'm nowhere close to him, obviously. But being a physicist, you cannot talk enough about Einstein. But the thought process is I've been a techie, and then moved more into the product management part of it. And then as I was managing products, managing P&L, I'm like, why can't I think about having my own business? Mm-hmm. And that's when I really started looking at how can I get into a business but minimize my risk. And this is where franchise kind of thought process came in and model, because franchises are, you're buying a license to run a particular formula. They have worked out the kinks in the system. Depending on what stage that franchise in, you actually even have an idea about what your profitability is going to be. There are no guarantees of success, but the probability of success is much, much higher because you're given a formula, you have an interdependent community that you can rely on. So I decided to get into franchise. And didn't really think where I was getting into, as long as it seemed like a good financial model. But obviously, one of the thinking that one of the greatest CEOs of a franchise told me is that don't get into a franchise where you don't want to do your work. As in, here's a lot. If you don't like cut hair fallen around you, don't buy a hair franchise, right? So, I mean, I didn't think about it, right? We think we are just going to be behind the scenes, but that's not how it works as a franchisee. You are part and parcel of the system. You will interact with your employees, your clients, and you need to understand that process. But it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed every bit of it. And then during the time, I also ended up figuring out that kind of like I thought, as some of my friends called me, you're getting to be a recovering techie. I'm like, yeah, kind of recovering from techie, although and understand that tech cannot get out of my head here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized there's a lot of opportunities there in terms of things that needed some technology. It was highly underserved not because people didn't want to get there, because people just don't. The understanding of that business is a little difficult unless your hands are dirty. And as a product manager, I thought I would understand everything, but clearly I didn't, because you're sitting in a corporate world, you're looking into the world with someone else's eyes. Doesn't work. And that's where actually I understood there's some critical needs. And then kind of started looking at it in parallel. Well, does that make sense? Can I find a solution? Do I need to buy it? And I'm like, realize, no, some of these things need to be met. And this is where my kind of entry from techie to franchisee, and then again, getting back into techie kind of happened. The few key things were the first franchise I opened, awesome, spending 60, 80 hours a week learning stuff, right? I mean, hard work has not been a problem. But when I opened my second location, that's when trouble started, because now suddenly my time was half, but my work was not doubled but quadrupled. It's not linear. The work becomes quadrupled because everybody wants you at both places, and now empowering manager becomes an issue. So now you have to figure out how to do this, and this is where I started thinking again, how do you do this? How can I get a good night's sleep as a franchisee owner, and make sure that my locations are running well? And a lot of the franchise locations for retail run 7 days a week. There is no excuse of like, I'm going out with my daughter on Saturday. It doesn't work like that. Just because she's in the debate doesn't mean your clients are going to wait for you or your employees are going to wait for you. So a lot of those things really kicked in and say, okay, there's got to be better tools. There's got to be more ways that are efficient to do this. And that's where my technology getting into the compliance world kicked in. Does that help with a good introduction, or is it too long?
That was an outstanding introduction.
You're good. You're good. So, you came up with Focus 451, and Focus 451 provides real-time brand compliance, right?
Yep.
And this is for kind of two different solutions or applications, right? One of which is for location, and then for a franchisor. Can you explain a little bit more about how that works?
Sure. So rather than looking at it as two different things, think of two different users, right? I mean, we have multiple type of users, but end of the day, the business owner becomes the big user because he or she is the person who has everything at stake. When you're a franchisee, for example, you have been given a formula. When you're an independent business owner, you don't have a formula, you have invented it, you have created it. There's a lot of stake at both ends. As a franchisee, you probably have signed off on a lot of documents that have personal guarantees too. So stay in good health when it comes down to anything that your business requires matters. When you look at a franchise that has 1,000+ locations, an incident happening at one of the locations impacts tremendously throughout. And in today's world of really this high velocity communication through Twitter and all these instruments are great for marketing, but are equally damaging for a reputation. And that happens when something just doesn't work because someone hasn't been told something, or someone decides to do it something because they don't understand stuff. So from that angle, it turns out that you have to be careful, especially when you're a part of a franchise. And the franchise say, I want to make sure, like you go to McDonald's and you want to make sure the burger tastes the same everywhere.
Yep.
How are you going to do that, right? You go to places like, gyms or spas where you want the same experience, which means all of your staff actually have to be trained exactly the same way, uniform. And that's
Right.
what it is, right? You want to make sure they're trained, but not only that, they also want to make sure that the staff actually knows their boundaries, right? And these are all brand. This is brand, right? I mean, when you're
Yep.
looking at 1,000 locations, if something goes wrong, no one ever remembers the employee name. People even forget who the franchisee is, but no one ever forgets the brand name. I mean, I can give 1,000 of
True.
examples where things have gone wrong and people don't know where it is, and they will just simply say, "Oh, this particular franchise location in San Jose, or this particular chain." And so it comes down to that. Not only do you need to do it at the location level where the franchisee is able to do something,
Right.
or an independent owner, but if you're a part of a franchise, now the franchise themselves want to look at everything and say, "Hey, it's all good." But when franchisors start taking too much interest, well, they always have a lot of interest, but when they start looking at in too much in detail into the operations, now they become liable for a joint employer status. And that's
Yep.
really a big legal risk, because on one hand, you want to make sure that every meal maker, every food handler, every therapist, every stylist is actually doing exactly what the chain has dictated them to do, what the brand has dictated them to do.
Right.
But on the other hand, if they start knowing, hey, this is William or this is Jane, and they should be doing this way, now they're too much into that operation. So that is why when we designed, as we went through our design and thinking who the users are, if you're an employee, you want to just go online, learn your stuff, and move on and sign documents. If you're the franchisee, you want to be able to know exactly who has done it. I want to know if Jane has done it or not. But I
Right.
also want to make sure if every esthetician, every therapist, every hairstylist, every food handler has done everything that they have, irrespective of their names as well. If I'm the franchisor, I really don't want to know that Jane works for, say, for example, William or Lauren. I just want to know that all the estheticians in my entire brand have done all the things that they're supposed to do. And whatever those are, they may be permits, expiration, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And so that detachment of that firewall is something was very, very important. And that's why we designed our platform in that multi-tier way, where the franchisor or the business owner can do everything in detail and see, but the franchisor sees only what they're supposed to and should be seeing. And that eliminates privacy risk, that eliminates these joint employment status risks, which are huge. I mean, you might have seen, if you go online and just Google joint employment
Yeah.
lawsuits, you will see what
Well,
big
I'm
names come
thinking
up.
of, I was just thinking of Chipotle, for example, who
Yep.
they have one situation down in, they'll remain nameless,
Mhm.
and it affected the entire brand to a degree where they had to go through a complete rebranding for
Yep.
Chipotle to get it back to where it is today. I also
Mhm.
think about, you mentioned just for yourself as a multi-franchisee owner, a very successful one for Massage Envy, by the way, that you didn't necessarily get into franchising, knowing everything you had to know. You knew that
Yep.
you mentioned the probability of success in going into franchise was a good one. It was one as a business person was worth taking. But
Yep.
what William and I see all the time, and I know you see with Focus 451 and speaking with these franchise owners, is that they don't know what they need to know to run a business. They were executives, or this is a side hustle, or this is an additional investment, and they don't know how to run a business. They don't know what they need to know when it comes to policies, procedures, onboarding, local, state, federal law, payroll taxes, HR. Is my employee being trained exactly the same at this location as this location? Because to your point, that branding is so important, whether you're a franchisor or a franchisee. And I
Yep.
think what is so important about this is that multi-layered approach, and to be able to, for example, tie an FDD into the Focus 451. So if I'm a franchisee, I'm able to log in and I know I'm checking every box that I need to when it comes to managing my franchise location. That helps me, like to your point, sleep at night, knowing, hey, I have the model. I'm going to do the hard work. I'm invested in a franchise brand that I believe in. And from there, I'm going to create success because I'm doing those things day to day and reducing that employer liability. And I come from a family of attorneys, and here I am at TriNet, and my favorite thing to talk about is compliance, because I think about, in all of the years that I've been in HR, the thing that will take out a business quicker than almost anything is something that is employment related. And so it's, how do you insulate a business? How do you insulate a legacy, a brand, that hard work, sweat from, in California, you can be sued from the moment you accept an interview with somebody. So,
Right.
How do you get in front of that? And if you're a multi-location owner, how do I log in and see everything that's going on? So maybe talk a little bit more about, some of that value as somebody that, partners with Focus451. What do I get? When I log in, talk about a little bit about that compliance piece there.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, in fact, you mentioned TriNet, right? I mean, TriNet being a PEO, I mean, when I opened my second location, I was literally deer in headlights, because I'm trying to ramp up this second location. First location is also still needing my help, as like everyone looks at you like, well, what do I want to do, right? And HR is not my strong suit. I'm a business guy. I looked at the financial sheets. I have an idea that I just want to make money, right?
Yep.
And I want to talk to my clients. But I must have good employees. I must make sure that they're uniformly trained, or else I get in trouble all around. It's not just about just going down to compliance, but also it affects my business. So one of the partners that we also talk about is a PEO, because they actually help tremendously for, as a small business owner, how I'm going to run my HR operations. I mean, one of the perfect advice I was given by my past PEOs, when I was at Massage Envy. I mean, actually, the HR partners say, I was working on a policy, and one employee comes and says, hey, I want to, blah, blah, this is my situation. I'm like, okay, you're a good employee. I would love to give you that suit. How do I do that? So I call up my HR partner and say, I want to change this policy to reflect this. And her first question is why? And I'm like, okay, this is the case. I want to keep this employee. She said, okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to create a policy. The employee is going to leave, and then you're stuck with the policy. So unless you can implement it across, how are we going to do this, right? And I'm like, I wasn't thinking like that. And she said, you cannot change your policies in response to a requirement. But if it's a good policy, do it.
Yep.
And that was one of the best advice I've ever received, seriously, in my 25 years of human resource management. And coming back to compliance, the same thing happens, because compliance is all about uniformity. It's about when certain things happen, it is the same response, right? And that's where compliance comes down to. But people only think compliance is all about government. That's not necessarily true. That's absolutely not true, because government generally just say, do these things and you're good to go. But even when we talk about our homes, right? When our kids start misbehaving, what do? And the first thing is, it's not fair. I'm like, it's not about fair. It's about, this is the right thing to do, right? Because that's what it holds. So when you come down the compliance path, one of the things that we realized we have to do it is make sure that all of this is also enforced completely. Because the problem that we feel is, once you define what those requirements are, what tool do you use to uniformly implement it? And that's when it becomes fair. And that is very, very important. So that's why one of the things that we talk about partnership is essentially, even when our clients are using our system, it's very simple. So in terms of when they log in as a franchisee, they could get, if the franchisees are also using our tool, then they can actually get all the compliance suite. As in, this is all this class of employees must do, or sign certain document, or upload certain credential and stuff like that. On the other hand, if they also have a good partnering company like a PEO, they can have their own best practices. And now all the employees are automatically getting those requirements enforced. And that's what keeps compliance in place. Right? It's not just about defining, it's about enforcement. And let the system do its job, so it'll actually automatically manage it. That's what our system does. So you bring in compliance as a library and actually enforce it.
Yeah, Mandar, I just want to jump in because I really love what you and Focus451 are doing. So one of the underlying themes of Silicon Valley Insider, we actually started off as a risk management radio show, and that was really hitting home the point you just made, and Lauren as well, that whether you are an executive, whether you are a business owner, oftentimes we don't think about compliance. We actually talk about risk management being all business. Usually, it's a risk management exercise between vendor and customer with
Mm-hmm.
some middle ground here. I was
Mm-hmm.
trained as a banker, so when I entered into tech at Cisco Systems, I love the company, but I realized that there's a really big gap between what we do in banking. I call banking a 10 out of 10 in risk and compliance, and then other
Absolutely.
industries are far lesser degrees, even insurance to some. So the key here is when we talk about consulting, when we talk about risk management solutions, the whole point is that so you stay in business and you don't get under what we call the crushing weight of compliance in the
Yep.
banking industry. And so
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the startups I work with, they don't have this concept yet. But as they
Yep.
scale, what we don't want them to hit is roadblocks. And the
Correct.
roadblocks could be we have different levels of what we say enforcement actions, right? And so, like,
Yep.
let me just bring up CCPA. I don't know if that's an area of focus for you, but the California privacy law. If you can
Yep.
imagine what happens to a company once they become big enough for CCPA to be it's always relevant, but relevant in terms of fines. That's where people should start scratching their heads, especially in a technology setting. We're dealing with data, we're dealing with privacy. Almost everyone is subject to some form of privacy regulation. So let's
Yes.
then translate that to the solutions you and TriNet have, and specifically around HR and compliance. These rules still apply.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. You brought up great thing like, excuse me, CCPA, right? End of the day, the government makes certain regulations, but it is up to the business to implement it. How do you implement it? It is very, if you read the documentation on CCPA, it'll probably put anybody to sleep because it's difficult to interpret it. You have to talk to the legal and say, so what does that mean, right? I'm like, I don't know, who are you? Like, they start with, are you a CEO? Or are you the data handler? Are you the web designer? And for everybody, it means something different, which means you have to take such a regulation, break it down, and create your business requirement, which means if I am a big company, enterprise, and I want to make sure CCPA is used, it is not good enough that I just put it on a website saying that we are CCPA compliant, or about this is how we handle your kind of your information, right? It matters how you train your staff. So when you talk about risk management, that is absolutely the critical factor, is because things will break. I did not say things can break. Things will break. It's a matter of time when, because things do go wrong. We are people, right? So first of all, you want to make sure they don't break. But even if it breaks, can you go back to the government and the legal authority and say, we did our best? One of the caveats of CCPA, if you read it, is actually, it says that you must take reasonable precautions to protect the data. What is reasonable? I don't know. It depends on which lawyer you kind of employ, or which side of the table you are. So when it comes down to that reasonability, are you able to prove that you took reasonable precautions? So like our software can also work in enterprise world where you're trying to push all these requirements based on whether government has imposed on you, or in a franchise world, a franchisor has imposed on you. Have you actually implemented that? Can you create a paper trail without using paper? Like the reason we call ourselves Focus451 is based off of the fact that some people believe paper burns at 451 Fahrenheit, right? So when it comes down to that, can you create a trail saying that you as a business owner, you as a business executive have taken all possible actions to prevent that from happening? That still doesn't make you innocent, because what has happened by through your employee action is the business is liable, but it protects you, saying that okay, you did everything in your power, right? And that matters. That matters a lot. There are companies who have no ability to create that, and which is why it matters how and what tool you use to do these things. I mean, when you are a small business owner, a mom and pop, your chances of getting audited maybe in single-digit percentage. I don't know how much they are. When you're a franchisee, the chances are pretty much, double digit, 50% or higher, because franchisors do a regular audit. Some of them will do a regular audit in actually will taking the risk that they're getting exposed to private information. And that's one thing our software provides from that firewalling, as I mentioned before. But end of the day, as a franchisee, as a business owner, you need to know, how am I managing my risk? If push comes to shove, can I produce certain documentation, report, some logs, something in the system, in that I did everything in my power. So one classic example is there are sometimes, some things, not every employee will sign everything, right? How do you keep track of that, right? Sometimes employees say, no, I didn't even see this. And our system will actually allow the owners to see that, no, you saw it, you read it, you spent 5 minutes on it, you just chose not to sign on it, right? At least you as an employer have done the effort to present it to them and they chose not to sign it. Now you take action based on that. That's a different story. But it shows that you are doing everything in your power. And that's risk management to me, in my opinion, right? When you talk about compliance and everything, it's not good enough to say that, oh, I just gave them this much paperwork. They took it home, never came back. Doesn't work. So paper doesn't work anymore.
Offensively. You can't wait or wait to be reactive anymore. Yes. I think we're seeing that more and more even now in this environment. These company business owners I spoke with 2-3 years ago are now coming out going, I need to talk to you right now because we thought nothing would happen. And to your point, it's not a matter of if, it's when. So creating that foundation as early on as possible, that's going to help you scale and grow. If you put your head in the sand and ignore that, then you're going to be waiting for these things that could possibly happen and sometimes do. And I think, Keith, this, how many startups go out of business versus those who succeed. It's, the number is there, far fewer succeed than actually.
Yeah, it's over 90% that don't make it. One thing I want to add up to Mandar and Lauren and William, a pro tip when we talk about any business, especially how banks look at it. And we learned also during Sarbanes-Oxley for enterprises, the Enron scandal, that when you do set up your policies adhering to what you think the government's told you, the minimum requirement is that if you do get audited, that you at least adhere to the policy you set forth. One of the mistakes that companies made during the fallout of Enron was to overbuild their Sarbanes-Oxley program. And so now they're being tested on every single facet, and they might have overbuilt it so much that they didn't need to. Now it's the crushing weight of trying to adhere to that. Because as Mandar said, all the government really cares about is that at a minimum, you're doing exactly what you said you would do, and that they can test it. And that way, even if you test it, but you got it wrong the first time, you can adjust it. But if you set up a framework, what we say in risk management, when you set up a framework that you don't adhere to, then how will they ever know that you're in compliance? Because you're not even following what you said you would do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, now the employees are getting smarter and smarter as well. So the reality is, as a business owner, if you want to, in addition, make sure that you're going to stay in business and that you're putting these policies out and that you're adhering to them, you've got to be even more careful about what those policies look like, because unfortunately, that's just the nature of reality right now.
Well,
right?
That's the thing where you cannot be an expert in everything.
Nope.
And we talk about core versus context in a lot of the outsourcing world. You want to be laser focused on your core, and you want to actually, I'm a big believer in managed services, out-tasking, outsourcing. You keep the keys to the kingdom, the crown jewels within your own realm, but anything that you can do cheaper and is not core to your business, you should actually find experts to help you with.
Mm-hmm. I outsource everything.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense, because I think I just recently wrote a post on best buy versus build, right? I mean, that's what it's actually Keith is talking about, is that because when you are actually outsourcing, you are going to get the best practices. When you do it yourself, you may not know the best practices unless you are the subject matter expert. And that's what it comes down to. So, it's kind of, again, going back to POs like TriNet and others, where if I'm not the human resource person, I've got to talk to Lawrence and Williams of the world and say, hey, you know what? Tell me, help me manage this. And then I'll focus on my business, right?
Mm-hmm. And profitability. Right? Yep. Isn't that why you own a business? You want to increase your profits? And I think, Keith, you said it dead on. Like, you're looking at your P&L, you're looking at your operation, your operational expenses, your cost of goods. What things there do you not need to be touching that you can outsource? And if it's going to outsource, it's going to be done correctly and save you money and time.
The only caveat is if you are going to outsource, that will still be audited. We call it third party or fourth party risk. And so you still have to have the ability to check that your outsourcer is still adhering to the requirements. And that could be through a TriNet, through Mandar's company, through another service. I've been in situations where leading third party risk for the second largest bank in the world, I had to take something captive. So that's where you outsource to a foreign location, a many $1 million business unit, but you cannot prove to the regulator that you have total control. So you got to buy it out. So it goes the other way too. So the messaging here is small businesses, franchises, things that are very clear cut. There should be operational efficiency in outsourcing. Just know that you still have to have oversight into what you've outsourced.
Yep. Couldn't agree more on that.
Mm-hmm.
Lauren, I think you said something very interesting earlier about how businesses are changing. Yesterday, we had a conversation with our national industry VP for the Main Street vertical. Lauren and I sit on somewhat of a advisory board for the Main Street vertical. And so in this group, he was like, hey, look, these buyers are different. They're buying different. Right. But really what it's about is like de-risking compliance, and Lauren's response was like, hey, I just had a conversation with several companies who are, they're going through generational exits. Right. And these newcomers really don't understand compliance, but they want to keep the legacy of what their parents and their past generations have built for them, but they're thinking, how do I do it? I can't be a subject matter expert, right? Just like Keith was saying, I need to stay laser focused on what my family has built and continue to drive revenue that way. But also now I'm open to outsourcing it to the best people. So Lauren, that was such a great story that you had shared yesterday, and I think it's important that folks listening in understand that.
Well, I think too, I always say a business owner, when they build a business, it's like their baby. I'm a mom, so I take my baby very seriously. And you want to do everything that you can to make sure that you're protecting it. And if you do bring in, you look at these multi-generational companies that maybe have done everything internally in the past, right now they're going, well, this is unreal. None of us have ever seen this. Let's be honest. None of us on the phone anywhere have seen what's going on right now. So what can I do to make sure that I protect that baby, that legacy, so it can continue to be passed on, so that my family is safe, so that we aren't, hurting. And then the other thing I keep hearing over and over from my business owners is also protecting of the employees, making sure that those employees that they have are also very well taken care of throughout this, that there is this family with a small, medium-sized business that's very different than when you look at a larger corporation and wanting to, there's a sense of, I'm blanking on the word, but when you have a teammate, for example, or you have somebody who's working for you and their family, you have a sense of responsibility also to make sure that they're taken care of as well.
Sure.
I'm hearing a lot of that.
And Lauren used a very, very good example. It's like, it's my own baby. And that's exactly what I thought when I opened my first location as well. It's my own baby. How do I touch it? But even when it comes down to actual babies, there was a time, sometime back, when people used their own diapers. Nobody uses that anymore. Food, we would mash the potatoes and make food for them. And now we trust Gerber Foods, right? So we've learned, we've progressed, we've evolved in that sense too. Talking about employees come to work to be successful. No one goes into their workplace and say, I'm just going to have a crappy day. I'm not going to do anything. People come there to serve what they're supposed to do, because that's how they earn money. That's how they get promotions, right? And I've seen that in most of my employees. They really want to work, and they need guidance too, right? How do you give them guidance? Not by dumping them with these many stuff. So they also enjoy it if you make it an efficient process. When you talk about, partnership, it's kind of like a tool. So just the way we've evolved in, babies, food and stuff, there was a time when I remember my dad used to keep, he was an entrepreneur too, and he would keep all his balance sheets and everything on piece of paper, right? Then came Excel, and now people move on to various stuff. Same thing when you talk about documentation, credential management as the basic part of your compliance, right? I know there are companies who still do 55-page, 100-page handbooks. I'm like, give it to employees, and nobody even reads it, right? How do you make it? I mean, if you don't read it, it's not about reading, but it's about that means they don't know what they need to know, right? Their rights they don't know. They don't know how to really do these policies, right? And then people say, oh, you know what? I'm just going to do this in some sort of a smart sheet, or I can just send them. I'll scan and upload. Well, how can you find it? Is it still being done? So we have migrated from just plain simple paper to Words to PDF, which is still electronic paper. Then we put it in kind of Google or OneDrive kind of storage. But that's all there is, right? Now we need to go 2 steps beyond that. We need to make that an intelligent storage. Intelligent means, is it being used? How often can it be enforced automatically? So let the system take care of itself. Because computer does do the best job when it comes to mundane tasks. They will never tire themselves out. They will never get bored. That's the intention, right? And we, the humans, we have creativity. Let's use it with our clients. Make the customer service the best, right?
Like, what do you want your culture to look like? Exactly. What do you want, the people that you're hiring, how do you want them to interact with you? That's up to you to build that out, and you tell them and they will come, right? And I think to your point as well, it's so important. People, they come to work, you don't want people to want to come to work with a bad attitude. So people come to work, they want to make money, they want purpose. You show them the purpose. What is it that they're giving? Like Massage Envy, you're giving health, you're giving wellness, you're making people feel good. You're probably the people that work there are people that have that kind of healing ability. They want that in their lives. So when they can focus on that purpose, then in turn, the service that they're giving to your clients is going to be tenfold, which equals what? Great Yelp reviews, equals word of mouth, equals referral, equals people that come back, versus the opposite situation which is, I think you mentioned this earlier, Twitter is a great tool, but you have one employee make one person mad, and it's to the masses. And it's not just your one mom and pop location, for example. It could be your entire franchise system. It could be the entire brand. It could, so that's, just to kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Twitter is a tool. How you use it is up to the user, and people will use it to propagate, what has happened to them. And they will also be used to propagate, hey, this is how we do better too. So yeah, you're right. I mean, in other words, you got to be, as much as the velocity of information flow is like now, I don't know, 1 million times faster now as it was before. You've got to keep on track of that. For that, you cannot use human brains. We are inefficient. Like it or not, we are not as efficient as we think we are. And certain things are going to fall through the cracks. Leave it to the system. Let the autonomy take over there, and you do what you add the most value. You work with the employee. You make sure they're trained. You make sure that they know what a customer service is, right? When you say that I'm going to make you feel good, and the client, right? Just mention, right? How is the question, right? And there are certain ways to do it correctly. There are certain ways to do it incorrectly, and that has to be. One of our chief learning officers said, she said very, very well. She said, practice makes it permanent. We used to use practice makes it perfect, and I love it. Practice makes it permanent. And I added a little more than I said, good practice makes it permanent. But that's fine too, the same thing, because you've got to make it permanent. That requires practice, and that requires you need to make it properly. You can't just throw paper at people's face and like read it every 6 months. No one is going to do that. Even my children don't do that. So I'm like, how can you? I'm saying even my children, I'm like, at least there is.
I don't do it.
Look at it, right? So I wouldn't do it either, right?
No, I do it.
So we're at the 40-minute mark. Typically franchise coffee chat runs about 30 minutes, but I'd love to address one question that we have from the audience. Are you open to that, Mandar?
Absolutely. If I can.
Okay. And this one's directed to you. So it's from Michael Stafford. Does your software program interface with a franchisor when it comes to compliance requirements? Do they have visibility to verify employee licenses are current and training modules are complete? I love this question, Mandar.
So thanks, Michael. Yes, it does. The way it interfaces is a very anonymous way because the franchisors don't typically want to know the details of which employee and what they're missing. What they want to know is, let's say if the franchisor has a certain requirement, like for example, license and training models are done. They just want to know that class of employees. Let's say at your location, you have 15 therapists and all of their permits are in place. The franchisor only needs to know that Michael's place has 15 therapists that have done everything that we asked them to do, and that's all they want to know. Anything beyond that, if they know if you start getting into the name of the employee and stuff, it's too much.
Right.
So our software actually clears that firewall, so the franchisors only know that, so it doesn't expose them to any privacy or joint employment kind of exposures, right there, regulation risk actually. Yeah. So great question, but yes, that's exactly why we have some patterns on the system. Where we have created this multi-layer isolation.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that, Mandar. We have a couple questions via text. One of which is, if VCs, venture capitalists, or private equity firms choose to invest in a franchisor, what are your thoughts on the top 3 or 5 things they should be looking at while evaluating?
Wow, that's a big question. What I do know is
if you were in that position, what do you think you would look for, right, in a franchisor to put money into it, right? Being that serial entrepreneur.
That's what I would look at, right? I mean, if I'm investing even at a franchisee level, right? I mean, I'm still investing in a brand. I mean, think about it. If I'm investing in a franchise as a franchise, I still have to be a responsible investor to my stakeholders, but I also have a responsibility to my community because I need to invest in the right brand. When I say right, it must have a good branding, right? Famous, right? Famous as in terms of a good behavior too. The top 3 or 5, I don't know if I can list 3 or 5, but clearly financial profitability is number 1. But the 0, I'm going to say, when I said number 1, the 0 up top is brand, the brand value, right? What is the brand value that I'm investing in? What do people think about it, right? How often have they been found? If I go to a particular location, am I seeing the brand equity as good as some other franchise, for example? And it matters from the perspective that when things go wrong, and once again, I keep using the word when, never if, because end of the day, humans are involved, and when humans are involved, things do tend to get wrong. So when things go wrong, how have they been addressed? And how often have things gone wrong? A lot of those directly come to compliance. So one of the things is, okay, let's say I'm investing in a 1,000+ location franchise. I want to know. I really want to know, how are you really controlling that? Are you looking at the profitability of yourself and the location, or just yourself? There is a difference between the two, because when you look at the location profitability, you are actually empowering them that, okay, you're going to make profitable. So each location is profitable, I'm profitable too, as opposed to just looking after franchisor profitability. But the franchises are not doing well. That means your investors are not actually doing well as well. So brand, in terms of how the brand is maintained, the financial flow obviously, and then the financial flow directly relating to the location based, the unit level profitability. And that's any VC if you go to, and I think Keith will vouch for that too, being the investors and stuff, is they look at unit level profitability. Anytime you're selling something, unit level profitability matters. And the same thing applies in a franchise world. Are your units profitable? Because if they're not, it doesn't matter what your legal contract says, things will go sour over time.
Yep.
What does that look like as far as a percentage? Like what tracks you when you're looking at unit economics? Is it like, hey, 15% of a mil, revenue, or
depends on the industry, right? Depends on the industry. I mean, retail businesses, right. When you look at whether you're looking at, again, is it service based versus product based? If you're in technology world, right? If you're a SaaS business, I mean, people want to look at an EBITDA or versus which is versus just gross margin. Gross margin, they want 80% plus. When you look at a retail business, gross margin 80% are not possible, right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, when you talk about EBITDA of 5%, that's what the retails do, right? The question is how variable it is too, right? I mean, in today's COVID-related situation where everything is touchless, I'm seeing that the businesses that are staying stronger are those that are part of a bigger, better managed chain, because they automatically get the best practices and they're trying something out, but they are actually making a difference, as opposed to something which is singular and they're saying they try something that don't necessarily work and there's a cure still.
Yep.
Right?
They're
As
proven
opposed,
already.
exactly, they're proven, and there is a top executive who's thinking, wait a minute, I need to make sure that all 1,000 locations can do this, which
Yep.
it needs to be affordable, it needs to be implementable as well. So when you go into a
And
McDonald's,
repeatable.
yeah, repeatable, but that they're also going to be industry standard practice, not something haphazard as well. And so this is where, when you talk about, again, um, franchise investment and stuff, that's what people look at, right? If I'm the PV, private equity firm, looking at investing in a big chain, that's what I would look for. I would, at least.
Mhm.
Perfect. Another question here is, if you're a franchisee, let me see. There it is. If you were buying into a master franchisee or even a multi-unit franchise agreement, right? What are your ideal terms you're looking for?
That's a loaded question, because when you're buying a franchise, very few terms that you can negotiate on. Depends on what stage the franchise in, right? But let's twist that question a little bit. Instead of calling them ideal terms, I would rather call them, what are my ideal characteristics? It tends to be, it needs to be growth oriented. It needs to be, you come down to what happens when things go wrong. That's when things need to be handled, right? And not, you don't want the franchise to throw the contract back at you and say that because it says so in clause blah, right? Like, I know that, because the reality in business is, when you're reading through the fine prints, there's no relationship. But in business, it's all relationship based, which means, okay, things are bad, well, let's make it work. Both of us will benefit, right? None of the terms will ever, address those things. Nobody's ever going to say, yeah, if things go bad, I'll understand, because then you're giving them leeway, right? So the real thing that when I would look at is essentially to make sure that there are certain ways. For example, if I'm looking at a multi-unit location, I cannot buy into a franchise that requires my personal presence, right? Owner manager doesn't work, because I can't be there everywhere, right? Secondly, I'm going to have a certain, like, general manager, local manager, and stuff like that. It needs to be supported. By the way, that has been one of my primary terms, because if I wanted to grow, I wanted to scale, right? If it's a successful formula, the beauty about franchise is that if it's successful, you replicate it. And I want to be able to do
Right.
that, because what do?
Yep.
You just invest more and you double your profit, assuming it's the same, right? It could be less too. But in order for you to do that, I need to have that structure that is supportable, which means I'm not expected to be there at all times. Doesn't work. Those are one of the few things that actually go through my mind. The rest are all run of the mill. The government has already said you shall have these terms, and obviously you'll always notice the franchisor has a lot of stake, because they're giving you the brand. They're actually, as Lauren said, they're giving you the baby. I'm giving you a brand.
Yep.
If I get one tarnishment because one of your employees does something wrong,
Yeah.
entire brand looks bad.
Of
People
course.
don't care if it happened in Florida or it happened in California. People in Nebraska still worry about it, because, again, a lot of the information for that happens. Hopefully I answered that question well.
Absolutely.
No, that was great. I think where this person was coming from was, hey, what about metrics as far as I guess Paul Tran was on our coffee chat a while ago, a couple of weeks actually, and I think what he mentioned was, like, you have a franchise fee of a certain amount, right? Then a recurring charge on a monthly basis at times, and then also, in addition to that, a marketing fee. So would you be able to kind of share what your kind of ideal terms based on those maybe three metrics are?
Of course. To give you a baseline answer, none of those. When you talk about financials in terms of franchise fees and the percentage, none of that matters as long as the overall financials look good. because it's going to depend on the business. There are going to be some businesses where the initial franchise is going to be small, but the percentage per revenue that's collected is much more significant. And there are those
Of course.
where the initial franchise fee is high, but the per percentage is less, right? And you have to map it out. Some are 3 years, some are 10 years, right? But there's no point in getting into a 3-year franchise if you're going to spend $500,000 in building it up,
Right.
because you can't possibly collect that in three years, and then you want to like, oh wait a minute, now what do I do? Renew my franchise again. So some have to be the longer duration, but some can be 3 years, and you can renew them every 3 years. So important stuff, obviously, now that you talk about that, is those numbers are already thought into their calculations. So if they're not profitable for an average, because you will do this as a part of your due diligence, you will talk to existing franchisees, unless you happen to be the first one, right? Then it's a different story. Then you're taking a significant risk. So hopefully your terms can be more negotiated. But if it's already a successful franchise where you're able to talk franchisees who have actually worked that out, then those terms of how much are you paying are obviously calculated into the EBITDA, or the profitability factor. But what comes down to is that what happens at the end of the franchise term? Is it easy to renew? What do I have to pay to do that? What do I have to do to do that, right? I mean, am I rebuilding everything? Am I paying you more fees now? Because imagine you've invested significant amount to build out your franchise, and now after 10 years, you want to continue that because it's money, right? If it's financial cash flow looks, you want to continue doing that unless you happen to sell. What are the conditions of even reselling? How easy is it to resell in terms of not finding a buyer, but easy to transfer? And some franchisors really don't necessarily go after like you shall not resell, as long as it's an equivalent qualified client is brought to them. That's how it should be. But those terms need to be looked into. What people forget is they forget that end of the day, you have to sell it. It's the same dilemma people go through. It's like, oh my goodness, I own this stock, but I never sold it. Really? If you didn't sell, you didn't make money, right? So the same thing is true in this business as well, where you have to think, what happens when I go to sell? Why would I sell? My problem. I mean, I'm just getting old.
Well, and when do I want to sell?
Yeah, but how is the question? You need to figure that one out. And those are the terms that I would really look at more closely than the actual financials, because financials will get worked out. Other people are making money. That's why you're into that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've helped franchisors create entire 5-year spreadsheet and then said, so when I plan to sell, and they go, I don't know. I'm like, no, you got to think that through now, because if it's a 10-year license, you sell on 7th year, 10th year, when you're desperate, or when you renewed it, it depends, right? Everybody goes through different life experiences.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm just reading the text into the banner, but maybe I'll just read it and then I'll post it. As a previous multi-unit franchisee owner, is there anything that you would have done differently?
That's a good question. I have been asked this question before by my brother, actually. He asked me, like, if you were to, when I signed up into multi-unit franchise, actually, he was a great mentor to me. So he asked me, would you do it again? And I'm like, yeah, without a doubt, because the experience has been great. So I can't think of anything that I would do differently. I mean, perhaps think of my exit strategy better. As in, I don't regret my exit strategy, but I never thought about it. Right? When I got in, as I said, this is my personal experience, where I just got in and say, this looks great. It's going to be my lifestyle, right? And yes, it could have been, but end of the day, our habits change, our experiences change, and the
goals,
things around you change. Yeah, you start thinking, I want to do this now, right? I mean, I did not think I was ever going to get into software back again, right? I did not think I was going to get into a SaaS business and become a technology entrepreneur. I really didn't think, but it happened. So I'm like, okay, now I could focus on this or that. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go into this, so I have to exit, right?
Yep.
That's not how the right exit is. The right exit is, I've thought it through. This is when it's going to be at the peak of profitability or peak of this, not out of I have to now, right? Because I'm focused on this. So that would be the different thing I would say, that plan my exit better. So I would have known. It's like, when you talk to any financial investment analyst, they tell you hey, after you made so much profit, get out. Don't be greedy, because
Yeah.
it doesn't work like that, right? And we have all seen what has happened to stock market this year, right? How many of us sold really when we were at top and bought back at bottom? I don't know anybody. I really don't know anybody.
Yep.
Awesome. Hey, I have a follow-up question on that. What
Okay.
if you were to look back, let's say if you were to buy a new multi-unit franchise, right? Um, you now have a playbook in your head, and you say,
Yep.
"Hey, look, I think I'm gonna. I know the franchisor is offering me these infrastructures. What are like maybe top infrastructures you would say non-negotiable? I'm putting this in place
Ah,
to make
um,
sure I excel."
yeah. So actually, that does answer that other question too. One of the things that really comes down to is your employee management. I underestimated that, because I just didn't know. It's not like I did it on purpose, but I just did not know. What do I have to do, and what? I mean, I thought it'll all come to me. I even thought my franchisor will tell me, and they're like, they're not. I'm not supposed to tell you any of this, because then it becomes their liability, and I get
Yeah.
that, right? And I did do that after a few years when I actually had a PEO that I employed. I'm like, why didn't I do that from day one? And I'm not saying that because you guys are from PEO, okay? I'm saying that because I really, really think it added a lot of value, right? Because I can now then focus on something where somebody is telling me how to do that, right? And clearly, this is not a setup question, so I just wanted to clarify for other listeners as well. But that's number one, right?
Yeah.
But number two was also, I started putting in some of the automated tools much later. We could have done those right in the beginning. My life would have been easier, because, as I said, the first year I spent 60 hours a week just learning the business, because I didn't know how to manage franchise, right?
Yep.
But on the other hand, I'm also spending time outside looking at other locations for my other, locations for my other franchise location that I was planning to open. So a lot of things I was like doing this and that, and then suddenly the toilet will clog up. Who's going to clean it up, right? And I'm trying to you do everything, pin to
Yeah,
piano.
because you're wearing every single hat as a franchisee. You are literally wearing every hat. So you have to decide
Correct.
which hats do you want to wear and which ones do you want to kick to the curb.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, getting my right partnerships in place. As I said, one should be an HR partner somewhere along the way, and it is much more affordable when you go to multi location for sure. But you need to set the trend. You need to set the trend. It also disrupts when you bring somebody else in the middle, and people say, "So who are they, and who are you, and what is this?" and blah. Right? Employees also get confused. Second thing is, as I said, needs to be the tools, the right tools. And we try to go cheap. I mean, I would use our cheap, because we are business owners. So we're like, does it really need it? And one of really good franchisor executive had told me, it's like, this is not your home. It doesn't have to look like your home, but it has to look professional, which means you do absolutely what is needed to be done and minimal too. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I can deal with that. And that actually worked well for me from that advice. But that requires good tools, bring efficiency. Then you suddenly can go from 1 to 10 locations and not feel the strain. Then you keep that effort level on a linear level. Remember, I said it goes kind of quadruple and in cubes. You can keep it on a linear level. That's just my feel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I know we're pretty much at an hour here.
We're gonna have to make these longer, I think. We go over every single week.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I've been told I talk a lot.
No, Will, we could keep going. We like it. That's
yeah. So last week we had Michael Iannuzzi from Citron Cooperman, and Lauren and I both had hard stops, and we felt really bad because our audience, like, I was getting texts like, "Hey, more questions, like, please." But we had to end it early, so we might just switch it from 30 minutes to an hour.
Because I think we're gonna need to have you come back on. We gotta have Michael wants to come back on.
Yep.
Paul Tran wants to come back.
To do like a series.
You want to keep them coming back for more?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
this has been amazing, Mandar. I personally, just FYI, I took an entire page of notes off of you today.
Wow.
So I know I took a ton from this, and I know our audience did as well. So
Glad to share. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed this as well. Thank you.
All
thank
right.
you.
Well, um, if you guys don't know, fun fact about Mandar, he holds a U.S. Patent, and he's also a pilot. He's also known as a fixer, meaning like he's pretty handy, right? But also he was on the front cover of the IFA today. So really, really cool. I think
That's a joke, but you know. But go
it's the
on.
joke, really. Oh,
Yes,
I found it. I found it on Google, so I just thought,
yes, it is.
Oh, I was gonna say, hey, how did Lauren and I get on there on the front cover?
That's next year. We'll make
But
our way with
all right,
Burton.
Keith, any closing comments, Lauren?
My closing
No.
comments is I love the platform. I'm sure people will find out more and more, especially as they think about their franchise journey, that we want to get direct information into their heads, how to get started, what considerations there are. I really do want to emphasize again that you can never be too conservative in thinking about risk and compliance for your business. And I really appreciate everything that Mandar said.
We're all nodding you. Compliance. Yeah, I
Yeah.
would just say, please take a look at Focus 451. If you're a franchisor, franchisee, if you're looking at investing in franchises, please take a look at it. The product is absolutely amazing. And it does give you real-time compliance, bird's eye view into everything that's happening within your multiple locations. And I don't think that there is another platform out there, I know there's actually not, that allows you to do this. So take the opportunity to go check it out. And again, Mandar, you're a friend of ours. We should have been with you in
Absolutely.
Vegas in a week, but we're not. So,
Not happening.
you know, not happening this year, but thank you again so much for your time
Thank you.
and all your knowledge.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate this.
Yep. And so everyone who's tuning in, this happens every Friday, Franchise Coffee Chat. Again, like he said, the value that we provide here is just trends and insights. As if you want to build a franchise, or if you're a franchisor, we will have business advisors, industry thought leaders on here, and it's really truly kind of like a platform for you to learn about franchises, but in a very casual way. Right? These are casual conversations. You know, when I thought about tax and I thought about compliance, it's probably the most boring thing, right? but in this conversation, it's actually really fun. So, Mandar, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to the next Franchise Coffee Chat. If you like this, go ahead and share this with all of your friends or folks within your community. Hit the like button on YouTube and also hit subscribe as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have an incredible weekend.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Have a good
Bye.
day.
Bye.
All right, guys.